Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the American Liver Foundation's The Educated Patient and Liver Cancer Conference, our second day. So glad to have you all back if you were with us yesterday for such a phenomenal day we had yesterday with some amazing speakers and some phenomenal engaging sessions. And then we ended the day with a phenomenal couch conversations where a few of you joined us in a small little section we consider it our couch area, and we were able to speak with one another and share our stories, and even some of our presenters joined us, so it was great. So hopefully today you'll all be able to get as much out of the conference as you did yesterday. We would like to thank our sponsors, Bristol Myers Squibb, Eisai, Merck, and Exelixis. Thank you for your continued support of our organization.
When I think back on the last 25 years for the company, the learnings are deep and somewhat profound. We've done it our way. This is a hard business, but it's a really great business to be in when you've got the right team and the right mindset to go off and really attack some of the hardest problems in biomedical research.
I think for most of us, when we start a company in the biomedical space, the objective is fairly narrow. We just want to solve a scientific problem. Hopefully, the solution to that problem may lead to a drug.
From everything from access to government affairs to all touch points in the organization, the patient is at the focus.
Patients aren't only front and center in what we do, but Exelixis also works with a variety of patient advocacy organizations who work with us to create a united front in good public health policy.
As every aspect of the organization evolves, how do we have the vision to create the next wave of clinical studies that will help address those patients' needs, even as better therapies come onto the market?
Thank you again to all of our sponsors for your continued support. We just want to review a few housekeeping rules with you today. We will have 15 to 20-minute presentations followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. Use the live chat feature on the right side of your screen to ask questions. Ask away, please. And you must be logged into Google account to take part in the live chat. Thank you. And we'd like to also thank our committee for doing a phenomenal job this past few months on planning this for all of you. Dr. Ghassan Abu Alfa from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Dr. Sheila Esserin from Rush University Medical Center, Dr. Jennifer Guy, California Pacific Medical Center, Dr. Tamar Teddy, Yale University, and Dr. Ali Zarampar, University of Florida Health. Thank you all for everything you did to put this together. And our agenda for today As you can see, we have a full lineup of some phenomenal speakers, including our very own Dr. Taddy, Dr. Eileen O'Reilly, Andrea Wilson Woods, Dr. Patricia Sheehan, Dejanaba Gordon, Lacey Fetting, Sarah Schultz, and then we'll conclude with Jennifer Guy. Have you guys joined us on Facebook with our liver cancer community support group? We hope you all have. If you haven't, the link will be in the chat and you can join us. It's a great opportunity to engage with others. Oh boy, we have some phenomenal events coming up this fall and winter. First up is our virtual Liver Life Walk that's taking place exactly 1 week from today on Saturday, October 24th. You can check out the website if you haven't already registered. The link will be in the chat as well. If you have registered, let us know in the chat that you'll be there. We can't wait to see all of you next weekend. Oh my, some phenomenal programs coming up, including some mind-body workshops. The first one will take place November 23rd, Mind, Body, and Healthcare. What's the benefit? The second one on November 30th, Mind, Body, Coping with Liver Disease. And then the third one on December 2nd, Physical and Mental Self-Management. You can email Lindsay Ventura for more information on these programs. Her email will be in the chat. Oh boy, are you all getting a little hungry? Have you had breakfast? Are you looking forward to dinner tonight? Well, on November 21st, we have a delicious event coming up, Cuisine for a Cause. Many of you, if you've followed us for years, know that event as Flavors of Philadelphia, Flavors of Connecticut, Flavors of Tennessee. We've had so many of them. This year, we reimagined it to a virtual event, and it'll be Saturday, November 21st, and we would love to have you join us on that day. It's going to be a phenomenal event where you get to make your own dish, follow 2 chefs online. Join us. Check out the link. It'll be again in the chat box. And then you have the opportunity to engage with us, which many of you already are. Since you're following us now on YouTube, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, LinkedIn. We would love for you guys to engage with us. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Tamar Taddy, who's going to give opening remarks. Dr. Taddy is an associate professor of medicine in the section of digestive diseases at Yale University and staff hepatologist at the VA Connecticut Healthcare System in West Haven, Connecticut. She directs the liver cancer program at VA Connecticut and runs a regional tumor board serving Southern New England's VA medical centers. She is associate director of the PhD program at Yale School of Medicine. She is a board-certified gastroenterologist with a certificate of added qualification in transplant hepatology. She is also a member of our National Medical Advisory Committee, as well as a member of the planning committee for this conference. So take it away to Dr. Taddy.
Thanks, Ivory. I'm so honored to be here today, our second day of our first ever patient conference. And yesterday, you've learned a lot about, liver disease. And I'm hoping you guys can hear me because I don't see myself. So I'm just going to carry on. Yesterday we talked a lot about the approach to liver cancer, and we talked a lot about team-based care, and we stressed the fact that it's important that you're the sort of center of that team. Today, we're really going to focus on advocacy from a treatment perspective with clinical trials, but all the way to wellness and really caring for yourself and helping your loved ones care for you. So stay tuned for a fantastic day. It's a real pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Eileen O'Reilly. Dr. O'Reilly serves as the section head for hepatopancreatic biliary neuroendocrine cancers and the gastrointestinal oncology service. And she's co-director for medical initiatives at the David M. Rubenstein Center for Pancreatic Cancer at Memorial Sloan Kettering. She's an attending physician and member at Memorial Sloan Kettering and professor of medicine at Weill Cornell Medical College. Dr. O'Reilly holds the Winthrop Rockefeller Endowed Chair in Medical Oncology. Dr. O'Reilly received her medical degree at Trinity College and Dublin University in Ireland. She completed her residency training in Ireland and fellowship training at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Dr. O'Reilly has pancreatic and hepatobiliary malignancies as the focus of her research and clinical activities. And her research directions include integration of molecular and genetic-based therapies for the treatment of pancreas cancer, along with development of adjuvant and neoadjuvant therapies and identification of biomarkers for therapy selection. Dr. O'Reilly teaches and mentors junior faculty, oncology fellows, residents, and medical and other students, and she's had numerous teaching and other awards. Dr. O'Reilly is the principal investigator of multiple trials in pancreas cancer and has authored or co-authored approximately 300 articles, editorials, and book chapters. She'll be speaking to us today about how to navigate clinical trials and to advocate to consider clinical trials. Dr. O'Reilly, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everybody. It's a real privilege to be here, and thanks to the American Liver Foundation and to the organizing committee for the opportunity. So the topic today is on clinical trials, and I speak with a number of hats. So one, having conducted a lot of clinical trials over the years, and two, being the chair of our IRB and Human Research Protection Program at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So I have a dual interest in this. And as we always tell patients and families, clinical trials are what is today's current standard and were yesterday's clinical trials. So it's a really, really important topic. And I hope to be able to lay out some of the land of what clinical trials look like, what they are, what are the pros and cons of participating, and why they're so important. And then we'll be more than happy to answer any questions in the Q&A session. So just to set the scene, I think we all realize it's been an extraordinarily exciting time in liver cancer with the advent of new antiviral therapies for HCC and new treatments for liver cancer directly. We're now well entrenched in the era of immune therapy and targeted medications with tyrosine kinase inhibitors and related combinations. And that's led to the approval of multiple new drugs and new combinations, of which there are more in development. And it's when we're thinking about designing trials in liver cancer now, it's challenging because we have to anticipate, what is the current standard, and is that still going to be relevant when this trial is completed, and to plan accordingly in that regard. So just keeping all of that in mind. And I can't stress how important it is to think about participating in trials for either yourself or maybe a family member or friend who is affected by this disease. And there are multiple ways to participate. So sometimes it's in the context of a treatment or what we call a therapeutic trial, but there may also be opportunity to contribute what we call biospecimens. So that's blood, your genetic information, your tumor, or to contribute to a registry, or there may be supportive studies in terms of psychosocial awareness in how are people coping with their cancer, what are the tools that can help there. So there are a lot of ways to participate. So just going to explain a little bit about what a clinical trial is. And there are a number of phases of clinical trials. So starting here with some of the underlying principles. So for a drug development trial, it usually will go through a phase of phase 1 to phase 3, and then potentially approval. And just to acknowledge that there are many, many, many compounds that enter the clinical trial space after having shown promise in what we call preclinical models, so in cell lines of cancers, in mouse models of cancers, or other models. but don't unfortunately ultimately get approved. So it's a long path and can be a decade or more of work from the time of conception of a novel target or a novel drug, if that is ultimately to be approved. So it's not a trivial investment in the sense of time, resources, people with the disease, and all of the research community. And it's an extraordinarily expensive and labor intensive process as we think about how a trial is conducted. So going to an early study, that's a phase 1 trial. This is where we'll typically treat a relatively small number of people, often with a variety of different settings, and in the cancer world, a variety of different cancers. So it could include liver cancer, pancreas, bile duct, colon cancer, etc. And the initial goals are to determine what's the best dose. Should we be giving this drug once a day, once a week? What's the best schedule, and what side effects may happen, and just to recognize that in an early study we get a bird's view of side effects. We see things that maybe are common and occur with some frequency, but we typically will not see rare or unusual side effects early on. And most importantly, from the development perspective, we understand if there are hints of early effectiveness. And so, for example, in some studies, it's a very targeted approach. There's a finding, for example, in somebody's cancer, and we're trying to target it directly with a related molecule. And so that's already pre-selected in a way. In others, it's the mechanism via which a drug may work may be much broader, and it's not targeted, it's more an unselected patient population. So phase 1 studies typically will involve maybe 20, 30, 40 patients, and this is the traditional paradigm of development. I'll come to kind of the newer sphere in a minute. So once a drug has shown some safety information, we have an idea of how to doses, schedule and frequency, then we'll typically go to a phase 2. And this will be conducted usually in the setting of a disease group that are somewhat similar. So for example, if we take people with liver cancer, their cancer may have had an initial treatment, say with lenvatinib or sorafenib, and we're looking in a second line setting, say we're looking at a new immune therapy combination. So it's a specific disease and a specific setting, and we get a clearer understanding how it works in that disease in that setting. And we usually get a more complete understanding of the side effects. So it's a bigger experience, it's usually longer follow-up, and these types of studies can run over a year, 2 years, sometimes more. And then we'll know whether this looks poised for further development. A phase 2 study is usually a mid-phase. And then the ultimate sort of reference standard for determining whether a particular drug or strategy or combination is going to become a standard of care or a non-clinical trials use setting would be in a phase 3. And this is where placebos come in and randomization come in. And I'll come back to these in a minute, related to some perhaps misconceptions about trials. So phase 3 is defining a new standard, and usually the experimental intervention or drug or combination will be compared to the prior standard to understand how it stacks up. And often randomization will happen where a potential participant may not be able to choose, and their physician or treating medical team will also not be able to choose. Sometimes there's blinding, meaning neither the patient participating or their team knows. Sometimes the pharmacy has to know, sometimes other personnel have to know, but there's a shielding, and that's to try to minimize bias, because bias contributes a significant amount to our interpretation of what's going on in a clinical trial. Some phase 3 trials will have a placebo, and a person who's participating may not know that they're receiving a placebo, and similarly, their physician may not know. And that information is often unblinded when the trial is complete, or if there's been something unexpected where one needs to know during the conduct of the study. So phase 3 trials are big studies. They often will involve 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800 patients, and they can take a number of years to recruit and then to mature. And then the results will typically get presented at a major meeting, and they will be subject to peer review and scrutiny and critique and understanding whether or not they change the landscape of practice. So phase 3 trials are important, and there's been a lot of phase 3 trials in the liver cancer world in the last few years, and hence the number of new treatments for this disease. And then the last phase, which as researchers we're sort of less involved in, is what's called post-marketing assessment studies. And these are conducted after a drug is approved, and usually the sponsoring company or foundation or entity that's supporting the trial will conduct these types of studies, and they are to get a real-world understanding in a less selected patient population how a particular intervention fares, and also to get a better understanding of very rare safety events that can occur when a drug or strategy is opposed to hundreds and thousands and more of patients that we wouldn't see otherwise. So that's sort of the traditional route of trials, and often that's still what happens. Having said that, now we sometimes will see drugs being approved from the early clinical trial setting, from phase 1 right through to approval in one study. And the kind of prototypical example of that is what's happened in the immunotherapy world. And the reasons for it is because some phenomenal signals were observed early that there was an ability in terms of discussion with regulatory bodies that oversee trials to try to facilitate an expedited approval. And so they'll get amended along the way to incorporate the phase 2 component, or sometimes just skipping directly to phase 3. So we see more and more of that. And then there are other types of studies, what's called a basket trial. This is where we might have, say, a genomic alteration or a target that's present in a tumor that might be present in multiple diseases, like bile duct cancer, like pancreas cancer, like liver cancer, for example. We treat within the same study with a given targeted medication, but different cohorts of patients from different diseases. And we evaluate them differently, but get an understanding of how that looks. And one thing the Federal Drug Administration has brought to bear is the importance of what's called real-world evidence. And this is another way of capturing information outside of a trial that can support the approval of a medication in the current climate. And increasingly, even though most treatment studies are conducted in very defined settings, we need additional information on safety and on how more general populations of patients do with that intervention. So that's becoming more and more important. So a common question that comes up from patients and families are, what's the downside? Why should I not participate? And we always try to turn this around and strongly encourage people to participate, because again, the science is the future, right? It's how we make the world better for the person in front of us, but it's also, and I think this resonates with us all, how we make the world better for the people who in the future are to be diagnosed or affected by a given condition or cancer. And so the concerns come up that I'm a guinea pig and I'm going to be mistreated, right? And I want to dispel this, and there's a lot of data around this, and the US has undergone, like all countries, very substantive changes over the last 30 to 40 years about careful oversight and conduct of clinical trials. So this is a highly regulated process. It's regulated at the level of an individual investigator who's conducting a trial, at the level of an institution, and at the level of the federal government. So there are requirements that have to be met to ensure, and most importantly, that the welfare and safety of somebody who's participating in the trial is looked after. That's first and foremost our ethical and professional responsibility to our participants, that as best we can tell, it's safe, and that there's key governance and oversight to make sure we all do what we need to do to protect participants. The other piece of information that I'd like to share is there's a fair amount of data suggesting that people who participate in clinical trials, even if the intervention ultimately doesn't turn out to change the standard, that their care is better. And it's partly because of this issue of oversight and attention and follow-up, right? So that's an important point, and to keep that in mind. And also to circle back to the issue of placebos, they are a concern, and I think many of us, when we're thinking about trials and patients and families, for sure, we want the active agents. But we have to acknowledge, for a lot of studies, we don't know that the active agent is better. And it's possible it could be neutral, but it's sometimes possible that the outcome might be less favorable. And so for studies to be conducted where there is a placebo, there is, and there has to be, equipoise at the time that that study is designed. And if important new information comes to light outside the study during the conduct of the trial, there are overseeing boards such as data and safety monitoring committees or data and safety monitoring boards that assimilate this information and bring it to bear to a study. So studies are amended quite commonly based on new safety information and sometimes based on the evolving standard outside the trial as they go along. And so that brings me to a little bit more about how we protect people who are involved in studies. And so the primary overseeing body at an institution is an institutional review board. And this is a group of people who review on a regular basis clinical trials. They're selected to participate in the board because they have expertise in a certain area or they represent a certain important point of view. And so, for example, every IRB has to have a community or a lay member involved, have to have a scientist, and they have to have the appropriate administrative people involved. And IRBs, along with scientific review committees and other overseeing bodies, review the science that's being presented and to make sure that's being conducted in the best and the safest and most ethical of ways. And again, the principal role of an institutional review board is to look after the participants of the study, to make sure that the protocol is followed, that certain tests are done at the right time point, that that information is correctly captured and reported and is available for review as the trial goes on. So the additional responsibilities of the investigators that are leading the study are to make sure that the risks to a person who's participating are minimized, to make sure that those risks are reasonable, to make sure that it's equitable, that every setting where it's appropriate to have access to that study is tried to be made available. and that a person's consent is documented, right? So I want to stress this. Participation in a clinical trial is voluntary. It has to make sense for the given person. It has to be the right thing that they want to do. It's not for their physician, it's not for the family, but it's for them. And we always encourage patients and families to give due consideration to this as they weigh up their choices. But you hear my bias. Again, the science is the future, and it's so important to think about trials. And I'll just make one last point to kind of sum up here, that advocacy organizations such as the American Liver Foundation and Blue Fairy and other organizations are terrific entities that can provide resources and background information about trials.
Thank you so much, Dr. O'Reilly. That was a beautiful description of a very complex topic. So we have several questions from the audience here. One of the first questions is, why are phase 1 clinical trials carried out on healthy patients?
So thank you for that. So question, why are phase 1 trials carried out on healthy patients? So there are a lot of settings in which phase 1 trials are done. Some are actually conducted in what we call healthy volunteers who may not have any underlying medical condition. And that's just to get the very first signal of safety. Typically, not all studies are developed that way, but most phase 1s do require a high level of functioning to make sure that a person's key organs like the liver, kidney, blood counts, etc., are all in excellent working order. And it's to try to test in the safest way what the impact of the drug is from the safety perspective. So the first goal of the first goal of the phase 1 study is to make sure that it's safe. So healthy people, less risk of confounding complications from underlying disease or other related medical conditions.
Thank you. And this is a question from the other side of the spectrum, which is, what if I'm very sick? Will I get a placebo in a clinical trial?
So most clinical trials do not involve placebos, and most early phase clinical trials certainly do not involve placebos. And that is something as a potential participant you would have to understand and you would have to agree to for it to be the right decision for you to participate. And I'll also make the point that for late stage studies where there may be placebos involved, they are often on the background of standard of care. So for example, a typical phase 3 is the standard of care plus a placebo with a randomization to standard of care plus a new intervention or a new drug. So at a very minimum in that setting, you're getting what is already established to be the international reference. And it's blinded to reduce this issue of bias, which can be very substantive on the part of participants, but even more so on the part of investigators and people conducting trials. And there's sort of implicit bias in the way we interpret things when we know a person is getting a certain medication. So that's the main reason it's done. And in order for a placebo-controlled study to be designed, there has to be equipoise. So now I want to stress that, meaning we can't know the answer to that question to be able to do the study.
Thank you. Thank you. And one question that has come up is how do we talk as a patient to doctors about clinical trials? Is this something that a patient would wait for their physicians to bring up to them, or can they go ahead and bring that up to the physicians?
So that's a great question, right? And I think it's both. So we want a person with a given medical condition to be aware of what their choices, and one of their choices to consider is clinical trials. And at every decision point in the course of an illness, I think it's appropriate to have in one's mind, are there clinical trial choices that are the right decision for me? And to weigh it up. And sometimes it will, sometimes perhaps it won't. I think the other key thing is having, either a close family member, a friend, or an advocate with you when you're consulting with your medical team. This is a lot of information, both on the standard treatments, but also in terms of understanding what your trial options are. And oftentimes this will be provided in reference information with what's called a consent form, outlining what the study is, what the pros and cons of that study is, what are the alternatives if you didn't choose to participate in a trial, how am I protected if I participate in a trial, and what am I disclosing. So, for example, for people who participate in trials, we have to be able to look at their medical record to extract information about what's happening, but also the overseeing bodies like the FDA or whichever entity is sponsoring the study have access to certain information to make sure the trial has been correctly conducted, that we're reporting the information accurately, and that we know what's going on and have a good assessment of the study. So the consent form, having a family member, friend, or advocate with you, and at each decision point, thinking about trials as part of your treatment choices.
And where can patients go to find out about clinical trials in liver cancer?
Yes, so there's a lot of information out there, and some of it very well regulated and filtered, and some of it not so clear. I think an excellent resource always is advocacy organizations. They are very involved with the field. They know what's going on. They have high quality information presented in a way that's easy to digest and read and reference, and often have additional links to other resources in the field. So that's one place. I think a second is to your medical team and your nurse, physician, NP, PA that are looking after you. They should have some information or be able to direct you to resources. And government websites, clinicaltrials.gov, for example, for the cancer world, will provide a comprehensive way to search clinical trials, although admittedly it isn't the easiest way to search, but it can give a start point for trials. And there are a lot of other resources out there to tap into.
One that I might just shout out is Blue Fairy. Blue Fairy has a liver cancer specific clinical trial finder, which is very user friendly. It pulls trials from clinicaltrials.gov. So that might be something people would like to look into.
Thank you.
Another question that has come up is, when a patient is in a, for example, phase 3 clinical trial, will they know what potential side effects they could experience?
Yes, so this is an important topic, right? What is known about the medication if you're going to participate, say, in a late stage study? That's a phase 3. And again, a reminder that a phase 3 is typically comparing the current standard practice to the new therapy or adding the new agent to the current standard. So usually quite a lot is known about that drug or intervention by the time it gets to phase 3. So we have fairly good information on the common side effects. And that's something that would be discussed at the time of considering participation in a trial. It's also potential side effects are outlined in the consent form to reference. Now, I have to admit, consent forms are very helpful, but they can often list long lists of side effects, and it's a little hard to filter that for us all, and certainly for patients and families in particular. But we do try to put in the most common ones and some level of frequency based on what's known to help portray the information. It's also important to acknowledge, though, that we don't know everything, and that's the reason it's an investigational approach, right? It's in trials to learn not just if it's better than the standard treatment, but to understand thoroughly the safety profile and be able to manage the safety profile. So a lot of times as trials are underway, we learn new things. Sometimes rare side effects emerge, or sometimes a side effect in a particular patient population emerges. And that's information that's communicated to participants when it's important for them to know, based on the ongoing conduct of the trial, that we go back and we'll explain this and say, listen, we've learned this. We want you to know this, and we weigh up, does it still make sense for that person to participate? And often we'll ask that it be redocumented in terms of, consent form and in the medical record as a trial goes. So it's a dynamic and not a static process, and that's, again, very important to emphasize. This is, something that's happening in real time as the study continues.
And I think that's a really important point, because the liver cancer journey for patients is a dynamic one, and this is one of the options for patients. And I'm just going to summarize a few questions that have come up and just reiterate to the audience that clinical trials are an option, and you are able to talk to your physicians about them. You can bring it up, the physicians can bring it up. It is not up to the hospital or the physician as to whether or not you can participate. It's a joint discussion about, is this the right thing for you? And there are eligibility criteria. So sometimes people might not be the right make for that trial because of underlying liver disease. There's been some questions from the audience about how can I help if I have a family member who has cancer? Are there ways that I can participate and help? And there are ways to think about this by looking at the clinical trials that are available, and also just getting the word out about liver cancer research, being involved in advocacy groups and an American Liver Foundation. We're moving on to our next talk now, and I wanted to say thank you, Dr. Riley, for this. This was really wonderful, and I think one of the things that it reminds me as you're speaking is how many layers of protection there are in clinical trials for the patient. Ultimately, all of us are here because we're putting the patient first, and clinical trials is doing the same thing. So thank you for reminding us all about how important it is that patients have lots of rights in the process of clinical trials. So thank you for that. I think now we'll be moving on to the next section of our talk. The next section of our talk is about management of you, and we're going to be doing some discussion of estate planning, and we have someone very special to talk to us about that. Her name is Andrea Wilson Woods. She started Blue Fairy, the Adrienne Wilson Liver Association. She's a writer who loves to tell stories and a patient advocate who founded the nonprofit Blue Fairy, the Adrienne Wilson Liver Cancer Association. Andrea is the CEO and co-founder of Cancer U, a for-profit social benefit digital health company. With Cancer U, Andrea synergizes her talents of coaching, writing, teaching, and advocacy. For over 10 years, Andrea has worked in the education field as a teacher and a professor for public and private schools, as well as universities. She has her master's degree in professional writing from the University of Southern California, and her nonfiction writing has won national awards. Her best-selling and award-winning book, Better Off Bald: A Life in 140 Days, is a medical memoir about raising and losing her sister to liver cancer. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to learning from you.
Thank you for that amazing introduction, Dr. Guy. Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes, you're good to go. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Lindsay. I want to thank the American Liver Foundation for this opportunity to present a topic that I'm very passionate about, as well as thank Dr. Ghassan Abu-Alfa for nominating me, and a special shout out to Ivory for all of those late night, middle of the night emails going back and forth. You're very patient, and the American Liver Foundation is very lucky to have you. So we're going to talk about the management of you, estate planning, living will, and end of life decisions. And I always love to open with a quote. I love Dr. Atul Gawande. If you have not read his book, Being Mortal, I highly recommend it. And this is from his book. Death may be the enemy, but it is also the natural order of things. And I like to say that we all as human beings have two things in common. We are all born and we are all going to die, but we don't want to talk about it. And I am passionate about this topic, not only because of my own experience with losing so many family members to cancer and seeing what is both a good death and a bad death, but also because many years ago, I was the Greater Los Angeles Development Manager for Compassionate Choices. And Compassionate Choices is a nonprofit dedicated to helping people die with dignity. And part of my role was to develop, create, and present advanced directive workshops around the Los Angeles region to retirement groups. And I got to meet so many different people, and I presented to small retirement groups, to Caltech retirees, but by far my favorite group was NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, or JPL for short, retirees. So I want you just to picture this group, 30 people, and we are talking about power of attorney, will, and advanced directive. And all the people in the room, now these people are about to retire or have already retired from NASA. And I asked them how many of them have a will. About 25% had an actual written will. I asked how many of you have an advanced directive. Handful, 2 to 3 had an advanced directive. And I asked how many of them felt comfortable with their power of attorney for their advanced directive. No one felt like they had chosen the right person, which we'll talk about. And keep in mind that I was in a room where everyone was a rocket scientist, literally, all of these people. And the moral of that story may be that don't be a rocket scientist, which of course I'm joking. But even the most highly intelligent people often don't want to talk about death and face these decisions. So I hope that I will make this a little bit easier today, and that you'll leave with some calls to action. So first, let's just talk about power of attorney. It's a legal document, and it empowers someone, another person, to act on your behalf. And it's so important for all adults to create this document. You don't want to wait until you're sick. You want to do it now. And there are several types of power of attorney. It can be general, it can be limited to specific actions, temporary or permanent. It can take effect immediately or in specific future circumstances. And here are a couple that you might have heard of. There's the non-durable power of attorney, a durable power of attorney, special or limited power of attorney. A good example of that is perhaps giving your accountant specific limited power of attorney to handle a financial transaction for you. But for today's workshop, we are going to focus on your medical power of attorney, because that is the person that you grant authority to, the agent, to take specific control over your healthcare decisions when you are not able to do so. And again, this is a document where you name a specific person to make decisions about your care if you're not able to do so. And by selecting this person, this proxy, if you will, you can clarify definitively who should speak for you. And when I asked that question in the NASA JPL retirement group of, are you comfortable with your power of attorney? And no one was. It was generally because people picked someone who was obvious, but they knew that person would not necessarily carry out their desired healthcare decisions. And we'll come back to that. So here is my big tip, just because a lot of different definitions get thrown around. Medical power of attorney is also known as healthcare or medical power of attorney or healthcare proxy or agent, All of those terms are used interchangeably, but they essentially mean the same thing. And also, one more note on this. I have my little cheat sheet down here. Your current doctor cannot be your healthcare power of attorney unless it's a close relative. And sometimes in certain states, they limit the power that your healthcare proxy can do. They limit the actual actions. And another tip I want to give here that I've seen people make the mistake is they give their adult children, plural, power of attorney instead of naming one specific child because they are worried about hurting their children's feelings. And you can't do that because you are now putting your children in a situation where if you are unable to speak, let's say you're in a coma, and even though you've outlined your decisions very clearly, you have given your children equal power in your medical care. And maybe one child is going to go right in alignment with what you want, and maybe the other child isn't. So it's very important that you pick a very specific person. All right. Now we're going to transition into a will. And I feel like most people understand what a will is. You know, it's a legal document. It specifies the person who's going to manage your estate, so the executor, and who's going to get everything you own when you die. It can also declare who the beneficiaries are, so who's going to receive very specific items. And of course, if you have minor children, your will needs to specify a guardian for those children. And a will is separate from advance directive. An advance directive is also known as a living will, but for the purpose of this presentation and to avoid confusion, I'm going to use will and advance directive. And the other thing I want to say about this is there's this myth that if you are not a millionaire, that if you don't have a lot of valuable possessions, that you don't need a will. Nothing could be further from the truth. I have a cousin who lost both her parents very unexpectedly in less than a year. When her mother died at the age of 48 from an unknown infection, all of the property went to her father automatically. Okay, now you would think that her father would have taken that time to actually put everything in writing and to write a will and have it done. And he didn't do it. Well, 11 months later, he had a heart attack and died on the spot. And here was my cousin. She was an only child. Her parents didn't leave a will. There were 2 houses. There were 3 cars. There were multiple retirement accounts. And everything went to probate. And she didn't even have time to grieve for her parents because she had to go to court and 1, prove that she was the only child, and 2, prove that there was no one else that could possibly be a beneficiary, whether it was a niece or a nephew. She had to go through all of this legal stuff and couldn't even really process her grief for a long time. And also she was really angry with her parents because they didn't take the time to do this. And especially her dad after what happened with her mother. So please, if you're an adult, even if you don't have children, please write a will. And here's the talking about an executor and beneficiaries. It's very common to choose your spouse or a close friend as an executor of a will. If you do have very complex financial and legal affairs, it is more common to choose a lawyer. It's very interesting, though, that state law actually prevents the disinheritance of a spouse. Not all state law, but many state laws. And in Louisiana, this also extends to children. So something to just be aware of. But you don't necessarily need a lawyer in order to create your will. Preparing your will. There are a lot of resources online. As I said, you don't need a lawyer. Spouses need separate wills, very important. A non-beneficiary does need to witness the signing of a will, and some states require notarization. And something you can do nowadays that's very popular is to sign your will on camera. So you can actually do a video will and actually sign it on camera and say, these are my wishes. All right, another big tip, please keep your original will in a safe place because copies of the document do not have the same legal standing as the original. If you want to keep it in your home, fireproof and waterproof safe in your home is a good option. Safe deposit box in a bank is another option, but it's just really important that you keep the original will in a safe place. All right, so on to my favorite topic, an advance directive. Again, known as a living will, but we're going to stick with advance directive. This document is only about your medical wishes. It has nothing to do with property. It has nothing to do with guardianship of your children. And it only goes into effect when you are unable to make your own decisions. You might be terminally ill or in a permanent or vegetative state. And this allows you to make that choice ahead of time, for when this may happen. And another thing about this, I got my cheat sheet. When you do this, when you make this advance directive, you take the burden off your loved ones for having to make these decisions for you. Going back to my cousin and her mother, when she died from an unknown infection, she didn't have an advance directive of any kind. And she had to be taken off a respirator. And the person who had to make that decision was my stepmother, her sister. No one wanted to do it. And no one really knew what she would have wanted. And it's just, you don't want to burden your loved ones with that, or even your doctors, So this is your opportunity right now when you're not sick to put your wishes in writing. And here are some of the decisions that you can make. I mean, you can specify which life-prolonging treatments that you want to receive, if any, and under what conditions. This can include, fluids, nutrition, pain medication. Do you want dialysis? Do you want to be on a ventilator? Do you want resuscitation? So that's what a DNR order is. To get a little bit more detailed, there's also something called a physician order for life-sustaining treatment, also known as a POLST. These are not available in every state. This is actually an agreement between you and your doctor, and it is kept in your medical record. So unlike a DNR, which is not always kept in your medical record, a POLST is part of your medical record. And again, not available in every state. Also in your advance directive, you can say if you want to give your organs or tissue upon your death. So there are a lot of different things that you can decide in advance. So the requirements for a legal advance directive really vary from state to state. And I experienced this personally when I moved 5 years ago from California to Alabama. Totally different. I had to redo my advance directive. I had to get it notarized again. And the best resource, I want you to write it down right now, is the American Bar Association's Advance Directive Toolkit. It is phenomenal because it's not just a couple of pieces of paper. It's a toolkit, and it goes through 8 different steps about, helping you figure out what it is you would want, having the conversation with your family. It's very in-depth, but easy to understand. And also they do have the legal documents that are pertinent for every single state. And after you fill out those documents, you've gone through the toolkit and you really know what you want, you've had the conversation with your family, it is best to get it notarized. And depending on the state you live in, you may be able to have one alternate, as they call that person, or 2. And you do want to give copies to the people closest to you, including that, power of attorney. You also want to give copies to the alternates that you have, and keep them in a handy place where the loved one can find them. So always make sure the people who are part of your advance directive know where the copies are. And again, if they are part of the advance directive, they are named in it, they must have a copy too. So here's my big tip, and it goes back to what I mentioned at the top about speaking with an NASA JPL retirees. Your spouse, your adult child, your sibling may not be the best person to elect as your power of attorney. You have to have a real honest conversation before selecting your loved ones as your POA, because sometimes it's hard to do that for someone we love. You know, I know a woman when I was giving one of these workshops who said she was in her 70s and she said she didn't trust any of her adult children to do what she wanted because they just loved her too much and would have kept her alive, you know, forever. And she ended up choosing as her power of attorney her 21-year-old grandson. And they had a very adult conversation, and she was really happy with her choice. And the other thing about choosing your power of attorney, you need to make sure this person has a backbone, because they may have to stand up to other family members and really defend your choices. And last but not least, funeral planning. No one wants to plan their own funeral, but man, doing this could take the burden off your loved ones when the time comes. And it also ensures that your body is treated in according to your wishes. And as someone who has been in a golf cart, driving around a cemetery and having to make these decisions for losing someone, yes, please, please do this for your loved ones. And to go back to Dr. Atul Gawande, because he says it probably better than anyone, endings matter, and not just for the person, but perhaps even more for the ones left behind. This is the single biggest gift that you can give to your loved ones. And these are some general decisions that you can make regarding your funeral. Typically, there are 3 parts. How do you want your body prepared? Do you want to be buried or cremated? What do you want for the ceremony? Or do you even want a ceremony? Do you know who should be there? What should happen? Where do you want it to take place? I know my father doesn't want a ceremony of any kind. Me personally, if anyone's still alive when I go, I want like an all-night dance party with wine and vodka and 70s music and 80s pop and lots of ABBA, Don't Judge. And I want people to only say really super nice things about me, but that's my choice. And interment. Do you want your body buried? Do you want your ashes placed somewhere? Or do you want your ashes scattered? Write these wishes down and specify who should take charge of organizing the event. I take great solace in the fact that I know my father's exact wishes. Doesn't want a ceremony. He wants to be cremated. I know exactly where he wants his ashes scattered. That, as a daughter, gives me great peace of mind. And I'm just going to go over these quickly because I'm at time. There are a lot of different ways to pay for your funeral. You can buy prepaid funeral plans, although experts do not recommend doing so. You can put money into a special account that's payable upon your death. And please know, funeral homes are legally required to provide quotes over the phone and in person. In some exceptions, prepaying may be a good choice if you expect to draw down on Medicaid upon your death. And also, if you have a family plot, if you want to be buried in a very specific place, prepaying might be ideal. And I will finish up with this. As an author and as a writer, I firmly believe that you need to be the writer of your own story. And in stories, endings matter. Endings matter. You may not die tomorrow or next week or next year, but at some point, I promise you, I can't tell you what's going to happen after you die, but at some point, we are all going to die. So if nothing else, I hope you leave this workshop and I hope you think about your power of attorney and your will and your advance directive and What do you want your funeral to look like? Thank you so much.
Andrea, thank you so much for that. You know, you gave a real clear and honest description of topics that can be hard to think about, let alone talk about. So do you have some tips about how people can start these conversations with their loved ones?
Yeah, I go back to the American Bar Association's Advanced Directive Toolkit because there's a whole worksheet about conversations, like how to start the conversation, what to talk about. But you are going to have family members that refuse to have the conversation. And when you have family members like that, clearly right off the top, that person's not a good option for your power of attorney. But that advanced toolkit, I mean, I think it's like 40 pages. It's really in depth and it really walks you. And it's not something you just sit down and do overnight. It takes a lot of time. And I think it's really helpful.
I think that brings up a good point that these conversations do take a lot of time. It's iterations over time. And a question that came up from the audience was, how often should people be revisiting the plans that are in place?
Well, the rule is 5 Ds, and I hope I can remember all of them. So if there's a diagnosis of anything, you typically want to revisit your will, you want to revisit your advance directive, you want to revisit your power of attorney. If there's a divorce, of course, revisit all of those things. If there's a decline in health, if there's a death in the family, because sometimes a death in the family makes you think differently about what you may want. And also, if it's been a decade since you've revisited those documents, you need to look at them again.
Thank you. Nice. You remembered all 5 Ds.
I did.
Here's another question. What is the most important thing to consider when creating an advance directive or a will?
For an advance directive, it's strictly about your health care. So what is it that you personally want? But I think even more important than what you want is who is the best person to carry out your wishes. Because if you don't choose the best person, it doesn't matter what you want. And so I think you have to think long and hard about that healthcare power of attorney and making sure you choose the right person, and that no matter what happens, even if they personally would choose something else, they will carry out your wishes. And for example, I am the alternate to my stepmother on my dad's power of attorney. And he knows that I will do exactly what he wants. And I know every single aspect of his advance directive. I have a copy of it. And I'm comfortable with his choices. I'm not saying those choices would be easy for me. My dad doesn't want any kind of life-sustaining treatment ever. But I would do them because that's what he wants.
And I think that's an important point too, is do you talk to only the person who you name as your advance directive, or should you be letting other people around you know what your choices are and what your desires are as well?
You definitely need to let other people know, especially, you get to choose alternates. So depending on the state you live in, almost every state gives you at least one alternate. Some states like California give you 2. So your alternates need to be on the same page as well. You need to make sure that they too would carry out your wishes. And I have a great example about why an alternate is so important. So I met a man who had been living with AIDS for 25 years, and he was kind of suffering the long-term effects of the medication from AIDS. And he went into the hospital, was unable to speak for himself. They contacted his power of attorney, who was his sister, who lived 6 hours away in Phoenix. Not ideal, but she was the power of attorney. They couldn't get in touch with her. They tried to get in touch with the alternate, who was one of his closest friends, who was out of the country. And it wasn't until they got in touch with the second alternate, and again, most states don't allow a second alternate, that they were able to finally get in touch with a person who came to the hospital and made decisions. And he ended up being in the hospital over a week and was not conscious the entire time. So it's think I answered your question, but tell me your original question. I went down.
You answered it. I think
okay,
good. And having been in these situations with so many patients and family members, unfortunately, as well, really understanding what someone wants, and lots of people knowing that, even if you're not the person making the decision, is important. Because there's a lot of hard time. And let's talk about that. What kind of conversations should patients be having with their care team and their physicians?
Well, certainly if you have a diagnosis, you need to talk to your care team about what you want and don't want and under what circumstances. And many times that's going to change throughout your journey. At a certain point, you might no longer want treatment, or you might not ever want to be resuscitated. It really varies. It's very different to be 30 years old with a serious diagnosis of cancer and 70 years old with a serious diagnosis of cancer. I mean, it's very different. And so I think the onus is on both the provider, but especially the patient, to articulate what those wishes are and to have those hard conversations early on.
And this is a question about potential hard conversations. If there are personal items that people are thinking about, when should they be having those discussions? For example, someone is asking about, or is suggesting to have them early, that a patient is writing in that she's having conversations early about things like that.
If you're talking about personal possessions, that goes in your will, right? That's not an advance directive. I would have those conversations early. Certainly, I'm thinking about my grandmother now. So my grandmother, I wish, had those conversations. She wasn't a wealthy woman necessarily, but she did have a significant amount of a pension, if you will. And she also had a lot of jewelry. And it came as quite a shock when she died that all of her pension, retirement, cash went to the church, and all of the jewelry, which everyone assumed would be divided equally among all the women in the family, went to one daughter. So, and you don't want family fighting right after your death. So it's good to have those conversations early too.
Okay, so we can move along to our next topic. But I just wanted to say thank you very much for providing such a clear and honest discussion. It's really important for all of us to be thinking about how we can move your workshop into our living rooms and start having these conversations at home as well. So thank you for that, Andrea.
Thank you.
So we're going to be moving on to our next management of you discussion. And this is a management of you around wellness. And we have a wonderful speaker today, Dr. Patricia Sheehan. She is an assistant professor in the Parkinson School of Health Sciences and Public Health at Loyola University in Chicago. She's a registered dietitian with expertise in clinical nutrition epidemiology and postdoctoral training in cancer and vitamin D. The focus of her research involves the evaluation of medical nutrition therapies on outcomes in clinical populations, including those with critical illness, scleroderma, cancer, including breast, prostate, and blood cancers requiring stem cell transplant. For the past decade, Dr. Sheehan has focused her efforts on cancer survivorship, minority health, body composition, and vitamin D. She works with a team of scientists to improve the lives of those diagnosed with cancer and to discern the mechanisms by which nutrition and physical activity improve health, specifically quality of life, symptom burden, and physical functioning. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Sheehan. We look forward to hearing about wellness.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guy, for that introduction. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you look good.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I'm excited to be here. I want to thank Dr. Eswaran and the committee for considering me and inviting me to speak today. I love this topic, so obviously I'm thrilled to be here. I have a lot to cover in this short period of time, so hopefully I can do due diligence to it. I loved Andrea's talk. I actually learned a lot from that, just like for my own personal thing, but I'm gonna borrow a page out of her book, and I do have some like a cheat sheet actually to my right. So if you see me looking to my right, I'm just looking at some notes. So my goals for this talk are to highlight how lifestyle behaviors can impact cancer survivorship, taking into account the spectrum of treatment and where you are. I also want to cover nutrition and lifestyle myths, because I think there are a few out there that are worth talking about. And then when we finish, I want to leave you with some resources, because the topic of wellness is not something that you can cover quickly. There's usually a lot of follow-up questions, and I always go back to if changing people's lifestyle behaviors were easy, half of us wouldn't have a job in public health or cancer survivorship, just because it's hard. So before I start talking, I just want to let everybody in the audience know I don't have any relevant disclosures. I don't get paid by anybody who makes certain products. So if I mention certain products, don't think that there's anything behind that. So to begin, I want you to picture a large arrow going across the screen with 4 circles. So in one circle, we have cancer prevention. And in the second circle, we have cancer screening. And then in the third circle, we have cancer treatment and cancer care. So again, cancer prevention, cancer screening. The third circle is cancer treatment and cancer care. And then that fourth circle is cancer survivorship. So this is what we call the cancer care continuum. The bulk of my work deals with patients who are in that cancer treatment, cancer care, sort of cancer survivorship circle. And those overlap because many of the patients we work with will not come off treatment, they'll stay on treatment. So we work with them on their cancer survivorship journey to optimize their wellness. We focus on quality of life since that's so important. And we do this through the use of lifestyle behaviors, specifically nutrition and physical activity. So there are many components to this, but I do want to take I definitely want to take a realistic approach and focus on maybe where you might be in this journey. Every day is different for every people. We don't have a one size fits all. I mean, the beauty of working with a dietitian or a physical therapist or working with a clinician is you get that individual counseling. So I'm just going to talk about sort of general things here, just to sort of introduce some concepts. So many of the treatments we give patients result in side effects, and those side effects may be different for every single patient. Many of the disease side effects from liver disease in general, again, vary from patient to patient. So not everyone is the same. So I feel like we should start with this idea of, let's say you just don't feel great. There are periods of time where you're not going to feel great. So this is when I like to think, if your glass is half empty, what are some of the things you're feeling like your glass is half empty? What are some of the things you can do? And I think a really important thing in sort of a mental mindset that I've seen friends of mine and patients deal with is anticipate this. Know this is coming. Know that this is a blip on the screen, and that potentially, you will have days like this, and some days you're going to feel great and some days you're not. So, and with that comes this idea that you're going to be eating less, and your favorite foods may not taste great, and what tasted great yesterday may not taste great today. That's okay. So don't be too hard on yourself, because I feel like a lot of times our patients struggle with this pressure of, I have to eat, I can't have to keep my strength up. Well, maybe today's just not your day. So what I like to do is I advocate a lot of recognizing what I call windows of opportunity. So if your treatment, for example, if your treatment is on cycles, so let's say, like I work with women, they get chemotherapy every 3 weeks. So many of them say, oh, for about 2 days after I have my chemotherapy, I feel pretty good, but I know towards the end of the week, I am not going to be feeling great. So their window of opportunity may be that 2 days right after treatment, or it could be the couple of weeks in between their cycles. So those are great opportunities to talk about take advantage of these windows of opportunity and to focus more on healthier foods and physical activity during those times. Another sort of window of opportunity that I want to talk about is this idea of if you were starting a new treatment. So with new treatment comes this uncertainty of you don't know how the drug is going to affect you. So that's okay. Once your symptoms begin to fade or the supportive care therapies that we have start to kick in, that becomes your window of opportunity. So take advantage of those. So some tips I have for when you're in this sort of feeling like your glass is half empty mode is a really important one that we use all the time in nutrition is add structure to your day, right? So a great example that I like to use is, we don't take our medications when we feel like it. We know that we have to take them on a structure. And sometimes we have to treat nutrition like this. So don't wait until you're hungry, because a lot of times you may not be hungry all day. So schedule your meal times. It's a really important aspect of this phase. And then make sure that you're eating with your family and with your friends. We're human beings. Food has become very social. It's not just nutrients, it's social hours. So it's important to keep that in mind. So in addition to adding structure into your day, I would say think about meal preparation. So if somebody offers to cook you a meal, great, take them up on it. You know, if you can stick it in your freezer, great, you'll have that, you know, for later on if you need it. If somebody offers to grocery shop for you, one of the tips we tell people is have a list ready. Hi, would you mind if you picked up these few things? It makes it easier for them and for you. Another one would be if you feel like going to the grocery store yourself, have them go with you, right? So these are all things that we can do to support our meal preparation. And then moving along this line is this idea of like make every bite count. So if you're just not feeling that great, make sure that you're focusing on calorically dense, nutrient dense foods that day. So if you want to use things like nut butters or cheese or eggs or nuts for snacks, if any of those sound good, those are great. Those are calorically dense. Other things you can target on those days would be things like smoothies, right? We can load smoothies with all sorts of yummy fruits and vegetables. And if you put a Greek yogurt in there, that's a nice protein boost. So smoothies are a great way to get calorically dense liquids in. Another one would be soups. So things like cream soups, you can load those up with vegetables. You can put cream in there to make them calorically dense. So these are just tips. If you're just not feeling that great, or you're going through a period or phase where you need to keep your calories on board so you can feel better, these are just some things to do that. Another tip is to recognize that maybe temperature might be something you need to play with. Colder foods generally appeal to people more than hot foods. So play with temperatures a little bit. And then the other thing I always like to tell patients is recognize that nutrition repletion doesn't happen overnight. Just like we can't, you know, our nutrition takes a hit after weeks, and you know, so in order to get back up there, it's going to take weeks to get there. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so now let's switch gears, and we're going to talk about a period where you're feeling great. So this is a great window of opportunity, and you may be feeling like your glass is half full or all the way full or 3/4, whatever it is. So what can you do? And my answer is you can do a lot. So one of the things I love to bring people's attention to is this idea of the nutrition and physical activity guidelines for cancer survivors. We recently surveyed a new group of cancer survivors who we're working with. 75% of them did not even know they existed. And I think that's pretty consistent. I think many clinicians who have been surveyed don't know they exist. So these are guidelines that are really designed to help. They're scientifically based guidelines that are helping people in their cancer journey navigate different phases of it. And it's using science to talk about what can you do to help with secondary prevention efforts, primary prevention efforts, but this idea of also looking at the importance of lifestyle behaviors on chronic disease prevention as well. So we have done this with a variety of cancer survivors, and we actually have some pretty amazing results. So just to sort of cover, what do those cancer survivorship guidelines look like? And I'm going to cover these rather quickly, but I'll have some resources for you at the end. One of the things we tell people is get moving. Right? So, I mean, you always have to make sure that it's okay. Check with your doctor first that it's okay that if you start exercising, but this idea of get moving. You know, we push that we want our patients to be exercising 150 minutes a week. So what does that look like? That looks like 30 minutes, 5 days a week. I mean, actually the window is 150 to 300 minutes a week. So don't think that if you're at 0 or you're at less than 90, don't think you're going to jump to 300 right away. So 150 seems to be a good starting point, 150 minutes a week. So that's 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Or you can break it up if you don't have that kind of time. I used to have a friend, she would walk around at lunchtime, she'd walk around the building. Many of us are home, so it's going outside, going around the block a couple of times. All of that adds up. So the idea is to try and get 30 minutes a day. And we also have to teach our patients that you're not like sauntering as you're walking. If you can, pump your arms and really get yourself breathing hard and sort of, you know, not breathing to the point where you can't talk, but a good rule of thumb is push yourself to the point where you are sort of not struggling to talk, but it's not easy. It's not like casual conversation. So you can do this. We work with our participants we teach them Zumba, we teach them how to walk quickly, pumping their arms. You know, some of our patients say that they're dancing, they're using the elliptical machine, a stationary bike. I will tell you, there are all sorts of great online tools that you can use. There's lots of exercise videos on YouTube. One of the things that we advocate with our patients is using pedometer apps on their phone so that can track how many steps you're using. If you want to, you can also use things like a Fitbit or a watch that somehow tracks your steps as well. People find those extremely motivating. We have had great luck with those. Another really important component of the physical activity guidelines is this idea of resistant exercise training. So you don't have to go to the gym and pump weights. We're talking about using exercise bands. They come in a variety of colors, red, yellow, and green. And depending on, I think green is the easiest one. So we work with our patients to use exercise bands to work out different muscle groups in their bodies. You can use hand weights as another one. You can actually use your own body weight as another one. We have our ladies doing push-ups against the wall. One that I like to advocate is use your stairs. If you've got a house with stairs, go up and down the stairs a few times. You want to make it more challenging, carry a gallon of milk or put a backpack on that's got a couple of books in it. All of those are ways to help build your muscle mass. And ideally, you should be doing this at least 2 times a week. So shoot for a little bit, cardiovascular benefit where you're pumping urine when you're walking. And if you can exercise using those muscle groups a couple days a week, that would be ideal. The other thing we tell our patients, it's pretty simple. Well, simple in theory, is eat more plants. So there is a big push right now for what we call plant-based eating. This is advocated by the American Cancer Society as well as the American Institute for Cancer Research. And it's not really just for cancer survivors, it's for anybody. So this doesn't have to be just one person in the household doing it, it can be a whole house thing. And we're not pushing that people should be vegetarian or you don't have to become a vegan, that's not necessary. It's just this idea of eating less meat and eating more plants. So one of the rules you'll hear is people say, oh, you should eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day. That's actually pretty challenging for people. If we could get most people to eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day, we'd be thrilled. I think the average American has something like 2. So there's a lot of room for growth there. So one of the things we like to do is teach our patients to fill their plate with, don't start with the meat, but start with all the sides that go around it. So they don't become sides, they become the main focus. So things like salads, think vegetables, think fruits. Those are the main things that should fill your plate. And then the meat comes in sort of last, if at all. So I use a couple of tips. So I like to tell our patients, we say eat the rainbow. Well, what does that mean? That means try to have something green every day, something orange every day, something yellow every day, and something red every day for a fruit or a vegetable. So that's 4 right there. Another thing that I pass along is this idea of, I try to say to patients to keep it simple, which is eat 3 colors at every meal, and white doesn't count. That's really challenging. So for example, like how do you do that at breakfast? So I try to do my 3 colors every meal, and I can't quite get it. So it is challenging. You've got to really put some effort into it, which is where that meal preparation comes into play and sort of stocking your pantry with things that you need. So think colors, think salads, think 3 colors at every meal. It's a good challenge. And then the other thing you want to factor in is this idea of eating more whole grains. So moving away from things like white bread and putting more whole grain products like whole wheat bread on your plate. So think of things like brown rice, whole wheat pasta, quinoa. All those things are great sources of whole grains. They make you feel full, they help with bowel issues, lots of good benefits. So again, this is a lot. Eating more plants is a lot. So we have eat more plants, but then we also have this concept of sort of eat less meat. You don't have to be a vegetarian, you don't have to be a vegan, just eat less. So the American Cancer Society and the American Institute for Cancer Research advocate 3 ounces of meat a day, which is really not much. It's about the size of a deck of cards, the size of the palm of your hand. Those are sort of references that we use. If you are going to eat meat, make sure it's a lean meat is another component of this. So eat less processed meat. So things like less hot dogs, less sausage, less chorizo, less cured meats. Eat more lean meats, things like chicken, things like fish, flank, sirloin if you're going to have red meat. So the leaner cuts of meat are also really important. And then another thing that we push is this idea of trying to eat meat alternatives. So if you have it like meatless Mondays is a big trend, right? So if you're not having any meat, put a different source of protein on your plate. So it could be a veggie burger, it could be a piece of fish, it can be salmon, it could be whitefish, it could be beans. Any of those work as a protein source. Another couple components of the dietary guidelines would be, for cancer survivors, would be this idea of eliminating alcohol or decreasing alcohol intake. So I like to remind not for patients, but just my family and friends, that alcohol is actually considered a carcinogen. So the less we consume, the better. So the American Cancer Society advocates no more than 1 drink for women and no more than 2 drinks a day for men. And then finally, we like to advocate this idea of limiting sugary sweetened beverages. They're really a source of empty calories in the diet, is why we focus on that. And most patients seem to be struggling with weight gain. Actually, a lot of our ladies actually have problems with weight gain after treatment. Okay, so that was a lot in one slide, or sort of one boost. But I do want to just say that this is actually relevant. So we finished a study recently with women who have metastatic breast cancer, and we advocated the American Cancer Society guidelines. We gave them ways to exercise. We taught them how to exercise. We gave them all these checklists of things that they could do to monitor their diet. And I will tell you, our results were amazing. They ate more plants, they exercised more, and their quality of life significantly improved. In our work, we focus on body composition. So this idea of getting your body moving is really, it's this idea of making your muscles stronger and making them more functional, because our patients were scared to exercise. They didn't know how to do it. So this gave them the power to do that. It showed them how to do it, and they were really engaged. It stimulated blood flow. It got their nerves firing. So it was a lot of really good benefits for them. And my colleagues and I firmly believe that healthy living is happier living. There's a lot of psychological benefits. There's a lot of physiological benefits, and these things happen together. All right, so switching gears just in the last couple minutes, I just want to talk about potential myths, because nutrition is sort of one of those things where I think a lot of people think, I eat, therefore I know. So one of the myths that I really want to touch on is sugar is bad. Sugar feeds my cancer. So we hear this all the time, and I will tell you, there is no data to support that sugar itself is bad. Remember, sugar breaks down to something called glucose, and every cell in our body needs glucose. Now, we can get this from a variety of sources. So where sugar is bad is, I think where it really comes from is this idea that people who tend to eat a lot of sugar, it's added sugar. So they consume a lot of sugary beverages. They put a lot of sugar in their coffee. They're using, they're eating a lot of sweets and things like that. So it's really more about diet quality. So just remember that the American Institute for Cancer Research, the American Cancer Survivor, or American Cancer Society advocate consuming less sugar because it surrounds more this idea of we want more nutrient dense foods, not energy dense foods. And sugar doesn't have a lot of nutrients with it. It's simply just glucose. The second one that we hear a lot is, I should eat organic, it's healthier. Well, our organic foods convey that they are grown, handled, and processed in a similar way, right? It conventionally means that when plants are grown, we don't use pesticides, or there's no genetic modifications to it. Meat, poultry, and eggs and dairy products are procured without antibiotics or growth hormones. In general, organic foods contain fewer contaminants. But remember, there really are no health claims that organic foods are healthier or that they're better for you. It's really a lifestyle choice. That's what I tell people. If you want to consume organic foods and it makes you feel better and you can afford it, great. It's not going to do any harm. But it's really a lifestyle choice, and we don't have hard data to say that organic foods prevent cancer or are better for cancer survivors. I actually like to remind people that while we lack the data on the effects of organic foods on cancer development, we do have good data to support that just any fruits or vegetable consumption is actually good for your health, especially chronic disease prevention. So just keep that in mind. Nutrition myth number 3 that I'd like to talk about is, I need to take nutrition supplements. Well, this is a big one. So 75% of all cancer survivors endorse that they take nutrition supplements. And I would tell you, this always shocks me because, first of all, it's a $1 billion industry. So there's a lot of reasons people want to push this. If you Google it, they come up so fast, nutrition supplements do. There's really not a whole lot of data behind any of them to say that they prolong survivorship, enhance survivorship, they help with survivorship. So just keep that in mind. When I talk to my participants about their supplements, I don't tell them not to take them, but I do delve into why are you taking them. I think that that's important. Also, a rule of thumb that I use is don't take anything that is mega dosed. Anything that's more than 2 times the recommended allowance is probably not something I would advocate for any patient. Remember, when we take supplements, we don't know, they weren't tested on people undergoing cancer treatment, so we really don't know a lot of how they behave in that situation. I do think that if people are interested in a multivitamin with minerals, I think that that's absolutely safe, and I think that that's fine. But remember, nothing more than 2 times the RDA. And then finally, I had one thing which I think you're going to realize what I'm going to answer is I should take it easy. I have cancer. So this is the mantra that many people have followed over the, I don't know, last several decades. And I think this is really getting some challenge. I know our data challenges it. There's plenty of other studies that challenge it. And I think what I always like to go back to is this idea of the cardiac model, right? We used to, if somebody has cardiac surgery, they are up in that hallway. They are marching down that hallway, moving out of bed. I think it's within 12 hours. So we are using that model more and more in cancer survivorship. And this idea of get your body moving, take advantage and get that body moving, because physical activity boosts mental health, physical health, and honestly, it's social. It gives you an opportunity to talk to people and get out. It makes you feel good. So we don't just advocate this for cancer survivors, we advocate it for all people. So more and more data is coming out about the links of physical activity and quality of life. So I think that that's something really important. But just keep in mind, you want to be safe, and you want to make sure that you talk to your physician about the ability of you to start engaging in physical activity. So in closing, I want you to just walk away with become a planner, or if you're a planner, become more of a planner. And this idea of taking advantage of your windows of opportunity for exercise and healthy eating. So plan your meals. I love to tell patients to plan their physical activity, plan your grocery shopping, plan what you want to keep in your pantry all the time so that you can make healthy meals. And then it's also really important to think about start small and be realistic. Okay, so don't think that you're going to become, you're going to jump off the couch and start exercising 200 minutes a week. Remember, you've got to start small. If you don't exercise at all, try and exercise 10 minutes tomorrow or the day after or whenever your window opens. The other thing I love to tell people is making dietary changes is hard. And one of my favorite quotes that I always go back to is Margaret Mead. She says, it's easier to change a man's religion than it is to change his diet. And I have to say, as somebody who's been doing this my whole life, I couldn't agree more with her. It was brilliant. So some days it's going to be easier and some days it's going to be harder. So don't be too hard on yourself. Just start small. Pick one thing and try and change it. Because it's those slow changes that we make, these small habits, that actually lead to bigger changes in the end. And all of this will help you stick to your optimizing your survivorship journey. So I know I talked a lot, I covered a lot of material, so I want to leave you with some of the resources. And this is where we look to for scientific and practical advice. So the American Institute for Cancer Research is AICR.org. Another one is the American Cancer Society. They've got a lot on nutrition, so that's www.cancer.org. And then there's a great component of the NIH website that is run by the Office of Dietary Supplements. It's where I go to look for supplement information. So if you want to search on www.cancer.gov, that's another great website to look for things related to dietary supplements. And then just in final, I just want to show this book. This is a great book. I don't know if you can see it, but it's called Nutrition for the Cancer Survivor. You can get it on Amazon. It is a great resource for cancer survivors. It covers the gamut of survivorship. So just wanted to bring your attention to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheehan. That was amazing. I love all the practical tips, including some that I'm going to bring home and try to get a rainbow of vegetables on my kids' plates this evening. So we've got a lot of great questions coming up. And one thing that I, as a liver doctor, I'm always talking to my patients about is high protein, low salt diet. And there are a lot of questions about high protein, low salt diet for liver disease. So let's start with salt. Do you have some suggestions for how to eliminate salt?
That is a hard one because we literally train our tongues to a certain taste sensation. And I go back to years ago, I had a colleague who was doing a sodium, she was doing a high sodium and a low sodium group. And the people who were in the low sodium group couldn't flip over to the high sodium aspect of the study because their tongues were reading it as so salty. So I think it's something that it can't be like an overnight change if you want it to stick. I think it has to be gradual. So things that we tell patients to decrease sodium is really, I hate to say it, but more plants, right? Like this idea of more plants all the time, you're consuming less processed foods. So if you consume less processed foods, that's a great way to eliminate a lot of sodium from your diet. I don't think you necessarily need to buy low sodium products, because typically actually there were years ago when they would label products low sodium products, nobody would buy them because they automatically thought they wouldn't taste good. So the best thing to do is regulate it on your own. Try and use less salt in cooking, cook more at home, and eat more plants are probably the greatest ways to decrease sodium content.
And for people who might not know, what kinds of foods have a lot of preservatives in them? What are some of the high salt foods that you buy off the shelf, as an example?
Anything canned is generally pretty high in sodium. So like we like to say, instead of canned vegetables, buy frozen vegetables. Like if you think about like something like tuna, it always tastes so salty to me. So anything canned or processed, or chips are another one that have a lot of sodium. Those are sort of your high sodium content foods.
Excellent, thank you. And what are some good sources of protein that aren't animal protein?
That aren't animal protein. Well, let's see, I like to think of that aren't animals. So it depends on if you eat fish or not. I mean, fish, sometimes people count it as an animal, some don't. So fish is a great one. So whitefish, salmon, shrimp, those are all I don't know if you'll count those as animal proteins. Otherwise, things like quinoa. I'm a big advocate of quinoa and whole grains, right? So the example I love to tell my patients is if you consume white bread, that's about 1 to 2 grams of protein per slice. If you change to a whole wheat bread, that's 7 to 8 grams of protein per slice. So right there, 2 pieces of bread, you've got 16 grams of protein.
Wow. And what about things like tofu and beans?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, I should have said those too. Tofu and beans are also excellent sources of protein. Tofu especially. Beans are a little more starchy, but they also give a lot of fiber with them as well. So those are great. So things like edamame, kidney beans, white beans, black beans, those are all great sources of protein as well.
Excellent. And there's a question from the audience about why is protein important in helping my liver? And Dr. Tahiti talked about that yesterday. She talked about how when people have cirrhosis, the liver is trying to generate protein, but not doing it as effectively. And so then we start using protein sources in our body. So being able to add back protein is very helpful, specifically when you have liver disease.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about suggestions you might have for people who are diabetic because they have some difficulty with eating fruits because of the sugar. So a patient is asking, do you have suggestions about that?
So again, I think it comes back to it's really, really important to put structure into your day. So one of the things we tell patients who have diabetes is structure, whatever. I hate to say 3 meals a day because then you peg people into 3 meals a day, but it's this idea of you have to do what works for you. Generally speaking, it's important to have breakfast, it's important to have lunch, it's important to have dinner because that will help regulate blood sugar control. We have some people who have to snack in between to make sure that they actually get enough glucose production, depending on if their liver is struggling with their glucose production as well. And again, that's also one of the things I like to tell patients too, is when you sit down to eat, make sure you have a protein source, a carbohydrate source, and a healthy fat source. It's sort of that fuel mix that works really well for people. So don't just have, I'm trying to think like if you're gonna have I don't know, I'll say a granola bar for ease, have a cheese stick or something with it that is gonna stick because you'll be hungry pretty quickly. So this idea of mixed fuels is also really important.
That is a great tip. And do you have suggestions for people? Oftentimes eating is a community thing where we're eating together. And so sometimes if I have liver disease, I might not be able to have the same thing as somebody else that I'm eating with. Do you have some tips about how to negotiate that interaction?
I think part of it could be, it depends on the situation, right? So in other words, if you're going to, let's say, a family party, although not too many people go to family parties right now, but we've had patients bring some of their own things. Like in other words, they say, oh, well, I can't have the main course, so I brought this instead, rather than sit there and not eat or not partake in the social aspects of it because you're not eating. You can bring your own, you can have a conversation ahead of time saying, hey, I'm coming, these are the things I'm struggling with. What can I bring, or what are you serving? I would say have a conversation, just like just sort of like a holiday meal, right? Like everybody's got a component of the planning to it. And I think that that's actually really important to make sure everybody's needs are satisfied.
Again, planning, it all comes down to planning. I love it. There's a audience member has said, culturally, our diet is very carbohydrate driven with tortillas, beans, potatoes, red meat serving. This patient's diet has changed significantly, and he or she wonders, can she have green chili every day for breakfast and lunch?
Green chilies. I don't see why not. I don't think that there'd be a problem with that.
Excellent, excellent. And then another patient is asking, what do you think about sodas, both regular sodas and diet sodas?
Oh, that's a great question. So I have to say, I'm not a huge soda fan. I never have been. I think that, first of all, regular soda contributes so much added sugar to our diet. It's like one of the main sources of added sugar in the American diet. So I don't advocate consuming it on a regular basis. However, I have had friends who consume it in high amounts. So I work with them to sort of decrease it. Then I have other friends who drink a lot of diet soda. So it's like anything, right? It's the one theme that we have in nutrition that really has withstood the test of time is moderation. So even if you switch from regular soda to diet soda, I still wouldn't consume 6 diet sodas in a day. It's a lot of aspartame or whatever the sweetener is in there. So I would say if it's really your vice, go ahead, but try and keep it within moderation might be the best way to go. And then also try, if you can, I mean, for some people, it's just the habit of holding the can, switch the can. You know, try something like a sparkling water or something that's, you know, less. There's a lot of flavored waters out there, and I actually think many of them are great. So
that is a perfect segue, because we were hoping you could maybe talk a little bit about water. I mean, how should people be thinking about how much water they should be drinking?
Water gets a lot of, I mean, it's funny. I always go back to my uncle years ago, was like, you know, my whole life I grew up, nobody had a water bottle. Now in the last 20 years, everybody's got a water bottle. So yes. So I think water is really important. It's one of those things that I believe, and I really have to make a concerted effort personally to drink water because I'm not that thirsty. So I feel like the more you drink, it does help you. It helps with saliva production. It helps with a lot of different things. It mostly helps with your skin. But I think it's a great habit to get into. So this idea of carrying water bottles and, again, sitting down and making sure that you have water with you. I will tell you, the breast cancer survivors that I work with consume a lot of water, and it's one of the side effects of their treatment. It makes their mouth dry. So it was universal that they were consuming like 8 to 10 bottles of water a day to help combat the dryness of their mouth. So I think it's a great strategy depending on what your symptoms are, but I also think it just kind of helps with keeping your body, you feel good when you drink a lot of water. So yes. I think, again, carry your water bottles, especially now because so many drinking fountains are shut down. And if it's reach for water or reach for soda, you always want to reach for water.
Excellent, thank you. And for liver patients out there, sometimes patients can drink too much water if they're have ascites and we're using yes. water pills to control that. Sometimes that can affect some of their blood levels. So we just need to be careful about that.
And I meant to mention that too. That's kind of one of those things where we like to think water is always good, but that's a conversation to have with your doctor as well.
Exactly. We have one last question. The question is it healthy to eat processed plant foods or something like a meat substitute like Impossible Meat? Is that healthy?
That's a great question. I had a friend of mine email me because she was panicked about the ingredients in the Impossible Burger. So I literally went through ingredient by ingredient to look at it. So I think what you're getting at, that question gets at, is what is the definition of processed? And I will tell you, there is no universal definition of what processed is. I think some people may think that a veggie burger may be a processed form of food. So it depends on sort of what you're comfortable with. When you look at that, I think the veggie burgers, most of them are made with a soy-based protein. So it may seem like there's a lot of process to it. I would say, to me, it's a nice plant source, a meat alternative on your plate. I think that it would be an acceptable processed food because the processed foods that the data points at are things like sausages, things like those muffins that sit on the grocery store shelf for 4 and 5 months and don't mold, right? Those are considered more processed. So the more food prep you do at home is generally a good rule of thumb to guide you in this idea of what is processed and what is not.
Another excellent practical tip. So we're going to close out this session. I just want to say thank you so much. This was really helpful. As a clinician, I'm getting these questions all the time when I'm talking to patients. And so for all of us to have these resources that you mentioned, and also just to remember the importance of planning, I think that that is a real take home here. So in terms of planning, we are going to take a short break. Our next session on mindfulness with a meditation will be beginning at 1:05 Eastern Standard Time. So we have about 10 minutes. I'd recommend getting up, stretching around, and then coming back a little bit before, maybe between about 1 o'clock, 1:05, so we can go ahead and get started.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Guy. We actually have a special treat for everyone. If you are able to take part of this little session that we have, we're going to have a meditation break. You don't have to participate if you don't want to during this break. You can get up, get some water in your water bottle, or walk around the table. But we have Dijanaba Najuma Gorton from B Yoga, who's going to do a little session with us during our break. So if you love to sit and stay tuned with that, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for staying on and joining me in this meditative practice. Again, my name is Dijanaba Najuma Gorton, and I'm going to guide you through a 5-minute meditation. So wherever you are, whether you're sitting in your chair or laying in your bed, make sure that you're comfortable. So we'll begin with some simple mindfulness awareness techniques. Let's just raise our arms up and reach above our heads, coming into a prayer position, stopping by touching our fingertips to our forehead. Let's breathe in for 7. Let's exhale for 11. Dropping our hands to our heart center. Again, join me. Let's inhale for 7. Exhale for 11. Dropping your hands to your side. On this next inhale and exhale, I want your exhale to be audible. So let's inhale for 7, drawing our rib cage up. Exhale for 11 loudly. If you're able, turn your bodies to your right. Maybe grab your chair, the side of your bed, finding a gentle stretch in our backs. Inhale for 7. Exhale for 11. Again, turning to our other side, finding a gentle stretch, reaching our right arm to our left chair, side of our chair, or our right arm to our side of our bed. Inhale for 7. Exhale for 11. Come to center. Now let's close our eyes. Let's breathe one more time intentionally. Inhaling for 7, exhaling for 11. Continue to breathe at your normal pace, closing your eyes. With each exhale, you want to blow away any thoughts that come towards your mind, focusing on your breath throughout your bodies. Feeling the air lift your lungs, fill your lungs, feeling the air coming out of your mouths. Paying attention only to breath. Focusing on our bodies. Let's do a scan. Releasing any tension that we may feel. Breathing. Focusing on breath. Inhaling, exhaling. For our next breath, let's again inhale for 7. Exhale for 11. Open your eyes. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that guided meditation. Again, my name is Dee Janaba from Be Yoga. Have a good day and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Hello. Thank you, Dijanaba. That was wonderfully so done, just so beautiful. So we actually are going to be moving along to our next part of the program. And so what I wanted to do now was to introduce Lacey Fetting. She is a clinical social worker at the University of California, San Francisco in the GI Medical and Surgical Oncology Clinic. Prior to that, Lacey worked at the Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center at Johns Hopkins University for 15 years. She graduated from Johns Hopkins University and received her MSW from Temple University. Today, she's going to talk about the oncology social worker's role in supporting patients and caregivers. Lacey, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm very delighted to be here. Can you all hear me? Hello?
Yes, you sound great, Lacey. Thank you so much.
Okay, very good, very good. Just wanted to get that settled. So good morning. This talk is entitled The Social Worker's Role in Oncology Social Work, and the social worker's role in helping and supporting patients and caregivers. I'm really delighted to be here today. I'm in Oakland, California, and it's a little earlier, so welcome to everybody. I want to thank the American Liver Foundation and Dr. Jennifer Guy for inviting me to meet with you all and speak this morning. And thank you for that introduction, Dr. Guy. I appreciate it. Today, I'm really happy to talk about the profession of social work. On a personal level, it's very near and dear to me. I grew up in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, with social work as a family business. My mother worked through her 80s as a therapist, and my sister is currently a psychotherapist practicing in Arkansas. My lovely daughter is applying to grad school in social work, and she'll be carrying on the family tradition. The social work professions abide by a social worker code of ethics that recognizes the unique dignity and worth of every individual. Patients and caregivers often say to me, "Oh, well, I'm sure you've heard this before." And I respond, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Your situation may be familiar, but you are unique. Oncology social workers witness this dignity as they closely listen to patients and caregivers share. They share how they adapt to their cancer diagnosis, how they reset their new normal, and how they carry on. I'm proud to be in a profession with a social work code of ethics that truly informs how social workers practice. What do I mean? One of the first principles a student of social work learns in graduate school clinical training is to start where the person is, start where the client is, start where the patient is. And as oncology social workers meet and interact with patients and families, what the patient says matters most will direct and provide the focus for our practice with that patient and caregiver. What matters most to the patient is how we structure our work. And this is a profound way that the work reflects the principles, reflects the code of ethics. And it's also why social workers wear a lot of hats, because people have a lot of different priorities. Today's conference is entitled The Educated Patient. And while I can't say how well I've educated patients as a social worker, I do know that patients and families are always educating me, always educating me. And for that, I am really grateful, very grateful. I've been privileged to be able to listen and learn to patients and caregivers. It's truly a privilege to do my work. I know that my practice of oncology social work has been informed by patients and families' experiences far, far more than any textbook. Today, I'll share with you the many ways social workers, in particular oncology social workers, can support patients and caregivers. And this is based, again, on what I've learned from patients and caregivers along the way. I often say to people, you have to accept my face, but there's lots of other patients and families inside my head. I'll use case examples. Please know that while the case examples are not real people, their situations reflect the realities of many patients and caregivers. I provided the American Liver Foundation with a list of resources so that you can have them as a take-home as well. So as oncology social workers, we support people trying to deal with their experience of having cancer, the psychological, the spiritual, social, emotional, and practical. We provide those supports in the clinics, on the phone, in the hospital, in your home. We guide patients and caregivers throughout their care plan, starting with how a person takes in and processes their diagnosis, how people communicate to themselves, how and when and how much people communicate with others, including their children of any age, older people, parents, in-laws, their workplace, and in the community, their children's schools, their faith communities. How much do they say to whom? Julie, a mother of 3, was just diagnosed with liver cancer. Her nurse referred her to social work. Julie says, what do I tell the children? What words do I use? Well, the social worker is guided by the patient who, as the parent, knows their children best. Social workers encourage the patient, and this is important, to figure out what she wants her children to know and when. And then Julie can try to script those words into 2 or 3 sentences to share with her children when they're all together that weekend. Oncology social workers check in with patients as they navigate their often intense schedules for different kinds of treatment. Hold on. Through surgical procedures, rounds of chemotherapy, and days of radiation. It's very intense, as you may know. Social workers support patients, a lot of times through Zoom, while they're waiting for scan results, and as they get updates, to help them recalibrate and regain balance. For many patients, managing the ups and downs feels like being on a roller coaster. Above all, social workers listen, and they listen in order to understand how treatment will affect and often disrupt a patient's daily work and family life. And as these disruptions gain in frequency, as it gets a little bit harder to manage, social workers help people understand their choices and the options for managing the disruption. What do I mean? Well, social workers provide tremendous practical support as guides, navigators. People grapple with the question, do I work or do I not work? To work or not to work? And while they're undergoing treatment, social workers can help them understand their options. Case example, initially Frida was able to work. She was able to work full time by scheduling chemo later in the day and later in the week. She planned for weekends for recovery. She begins to struggle with symptoms, using up her sick days and her PTO, and she asked for a social worker. She had heard some other patients talking in the clinic. Social workers can provide information and options then, like Google Maps with different routes, several ways she could manage. If someone wants to continue to work, but needs to adjust their schedule to accommodate treatment, social workers can provide information about FMLA, job protections. It's a job protection from the Department of Labor. And how do you initiate that? And what's the process? And how do you fill out those forms? Social workers can provide guidance. And if patients find that they're really not able to work, social workers can help them figure out where's the money, what income replacement programs or disability they might be eligible for, and whether that disability is through the job, the state, or federal. Social workers can provide guidance and direction through the labyrinth of disability forms. Which doctor gets which form? When do I have to turn that in? So social workers help patients and caregivers appreciate the way that these job protection programs fit together with income replacement programs and how all this works while you keep your health insurance. Social workers provide links to resources. Web-based organizations like Triage Cancer for their very specialized expertise in disability. These are organizations staffed by professionals, publicly available, and easily accessed for free. It's in your resource listing. Social workers listen to patients as they identify their needs, and social workers provide links to other community resources. There are pharmacy copay programs for expensive medications. There's transportation supports. There's grants for the costs of clinical trials sometimes. We provide education about eligibilities for those community resources that may be available to offset the tremendous costs of care. Social workers appreciate the way these programs can work. Often they're grant funded or funded by donor dollars. So the good news is there might be relief, and the bad news is these funds can be exhausted. However, they cycle through periods where they're flush and other times when grants run out, and social workers can provide guidance. In addition, organizations like the Patient Advocate Foundation provide terrific support on how to access different programs. They're web-based for patients to access, and sometimes they offer case management, which can be really helpful. So we provide connections. We provide connections in another way. Sometimes people are interested in support groups. Where do I find one? What's a good one? How do I do this in COVID? Well, they've gone virtual. Zoom is, gosh, I don't know what the stock must be doing. Cancer Care has been offering online support groups for years. Cancer Care, it's a national organization available to patients with a cancer diagnosis as well as their caregivers. Patients and caregivers can talk to an oncology social worker for free. There are organizations that also provide the vetting for patients when they want to talk to a peer, a one-to-one connection, sometimes through a disease foundation, through a local cancer center, and social workers can help you find them. Social workers often provide support and connection when treatment changes, during transitions, or when treatment won't help in the way that everybody had hoped for. Social workers provide information, guidance, and support when people want to know more about advanced care planning, palliative care, symptom management, even hospice. Oncology social workers are aware how unforgiving the healthcare and healthcare insurance systems can be, and how the resources, even though they're there to provide relief, can also crush with the paperwork that needs to be filled out, signed by providers, equipped with deadlines. Oh, this can be so overwhelming. So as social workers, we try to help individuals by acknowledging this stress and recognizing patients' crazy hard work in navigating this labyrinth when they don't feel well. Consider Thomas. I get a call from the nurse asking me to help Thomas with the paratransit application. He was going to fill it out and it just got lost in the shuffle. He needs help and he can't use public transportation right now. When I call and check in with Thomas, it's clear that this is not just about transportation. Thomas shares that he's been very worried about his scans. He hasn't scheduled them yet because he's afraid of hearing the results. Did all those weeks of chemotherapy help? Did it work? As we talk, it's pretty clear that Thomas's anxiety about his upcoming scans has affected his mood, his sleep, his diet, and his ability to concentrate. Thomas needs to be heard, and I just need to listen. Most of the time, Thomas and others with the same scanxiety can tell me what works for them to soothe and quiet their panic. Patients just need someone to ride it out with them, to be a witness to their experience of how anxiety feels bad, and their experience of what provides relief. I'm a firm believer that people carry the solution to their problems inside them, and they know what will help. When people get flooded with emotion, fear, worry, panic, anxiety, a tidal wave of overwhelm prevents them from hearing their own clear-headed, problem-solving self-talk. As a social worker with respect for each person's particular way, I listen and let the person tell me of their problem, and then they take a breath and can name their solution. And after Thomas takes that breath, I would offer words of support for him for getting through this pre-scan rough patch. And it can be rough. After Thomas articulates his own problem-solving plan, then I'd offer suggestions like breathing exercises or mindfulness groups or any other support group. And it's only then that Thomas and I can get down to that paratransit application. Caregivers. As a social worker in oncology, I work with both patients and caregivers, and I meet them in clinic. They're often present together. As I've talked today, patients and caregivers are in the same breath. As I conduct pre-surgical interviews over the phone, they're often both on the call. Again, patients and caregivers sometimes come as a team. They are the care recipients of the care plan. But I start with where the person is and check in with the patient, basically to define for me who their family is and who their caregivers are. I need to check in to find out who they are and if there are going to be changes, because many times patients and families share the care. Of course, the radiation is long. Sometimes people need more than one caregiver. But it's an important note that privacy law under HIPAA is serious business. And as a healthcare professional, I must first check in with patients and ensure that I have a patient's permission to talk with a caregiver without the patient being present. Social workers are professionally trained in communications. We recognize it's hard for patients to need their caregivers. Accepting help means accepting vulnerability. This is tough for both patients and caregivers. Most people do not want to be a burden to their families. I believe that in most families, we take turns actually being burdened needing extra help and energy. No one wants to be in these positions. And clear communication means talking out loud about these feelings. It's not easy to do. As Mr. Rogers said, if it's unmentionable, it's unmanageable. And with that in mind, social workers encourage these discussions as a way to work through tough times. Managing communications can also mean identifying who will be doing the talking with the healthcare team. Caregivers and patients often take turns talking to providers, and identifying who's doing the talking before the appointment can help. Patient autonomy is very important. So how else can social workers help caregivers? Well, you start where the caregiver is, with respect for the dignity and worth of each person who wears that caregiver hat. Grounded in respect for their choices in how to be a caregiver. Family, friends, healthcare providers can give a lot of advice and be pretty prescriptive towards the self-care a caregiver needs. You have to take time for yourself. Of course you do. Of course you do. But again, as an oncology social worker, I find it most helpful to listen, to ask how a caregiver finds balance, and listen hard as they share their experience and what helps. There can be critical periods in a patient's illness and treatment when a caregiver, however weary, however much other people are saying you've got to take time for yourself, that caregiver would suffer more stress by not being present with the patient. And as social work, we respect their choices. We also encourage caregivers to be straight up when family and friends say, is there anything you need? I'll do anything. I'd be happy to help. So social workers encourage caregivers to say yes or no, not right now. But if it's yes, to delegate a very specific task. Things like preparing meals, running a vacuum, doing a load of wash, running carpools, running kids, car washing, gardening, grocery runs. Yet, it's helpful to give people a heads up. A trade-off to accepting help is losing control. When friends and family provide task-related support, sometimes the dishes get done and put away, and no one can find the cake sifter for weeks. Everything is in a different spot. When you delegate the job that you need done, it's not going to be done the way you do it. And you're going to notice it. They miss those dust bunnies. Routines are disrupted, and routines help us settle down, and they aren't available at the time that we might need them most. When we're ill, and we need as caregivers and patients to allow people into our lives and our homes to provide support, we also lose privacy. And we can feel as we're on a webcam in our own homes. When families and friends share the care, our homes are no longer sanctuaries, guaranteeing the kind of privacy needed to process how we're feeling and the renewal that comes from having a little think. Even if patients and family caregivers don't have other people in their home, they sure do have the phone, and they can feel bombarded by the constant phone calls from schedulers, insurances, for Zoom meetings with providers, texts, postings, emails from well-wishers. Social work appreciates that caregivers are awesome patient advocates as well. They're pretty amazing. They're patient advocates with providers. They're on the phone a lot with pharmacists, with doctors, with schedulers, with insurance reps, with people from their loved ones' jobs and human resources, with disability representatives. And they function also as a gatekeeper for everybody's sanity, who's going to be coming into the home, who's not. So I still haven't identified how I can help caregivers catch a break. One way is to encourage access to FMLA so that they might be able to take some time off work with some job protection. And in states like California, to encourage them to access patient family leave. This is a great program in California that can allow up to 8 weeks of income replacement for eligible caregivers. And sometimes caregivers seek other caregivers to talk to. Somebody who's also walking that walk, and we can identify support groups or websites, blogs or listservs that specialize in caregivers supporting caregivers. Sometimes caregivers renewal, their replenishment means respite in the form of additional help at home. It's not always family and friends that can pitch in, so they need resources to supplement their caregiving, sometimes with a professional or agency care. And people need to know how to access help at home. And whether it's insurance supported, intermittent skilled care, or through programs linked to Medicaid or Medi-Cal. Caregivers need help sorting out what help at home is paid by insurance and when do we have to pay out of pocket? And how do we set all that up? And what agencies are available? And how do we know what their reputation is? Social workers can support patients and families in many other ways, depending on a patient's need. Today, I've just touched on a few. And you might ask, so where's my social worker? How do I access a social worker? Social workers who specialize in oncology, who have experience in healthcare or medical social work, are available throughout the country. Most important first step is to check with your oncologist. So as part of the National Comprehensive Cancer Center network, often larger academic centers, often these services are free. Social workers may be part of group oncology practices in the community. When you're in the hospital, inpatient social workers are available to help you with discharge planning and other resources. Social workers are also available through home care agencies. Local cancer resource centers, American Cancer Society, and Cancer Care are staffed with social workers. As part of my preparation for today, I provided the American Liver Foundation with a resource listing for you with the names of these organizations and their websites that provide support. Some I've mentioned along the way, like Cancer Care, or Triage Cancer, or Patient Advocate Foundation. Well, please appreciate that today I've tried to present you with a menu of the incredibly varied ways that social workers can provide support for you and your caregiver. We start with what matters most to patients and families. We try to act as a GPS with step-by-step guidance through paperwork, linking you to community resources, with respect for individual coping strategies and a listening ear when people need more. I'd be remiss if I didn't add that my work in oncology is incredibly rewarding because I'm surrounded by the courage of patients and their caregivers. I want to thank you for your time and attention today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Take care.
Lacey, thank you so much. That was just phenomenal. What a pleasure for us to be able to hear all of your experience and these beautiful suggestions. We'll be sharing the resources you provided in the patient toolkit that will be sent out to all the participants today. And a participant wrote to say that she felt like you were speaking to her heart. And I feel like all of us felt that way. Somehow by talking, you're also listening, and you really emphasized the importance of listening. So thank you for that. The next speaker we're going to be learning from is Sarah Schultz. She's very special and near and dear to me. She's a patient advocate for the National Cancer Institute Gastrointestinal Steering Committee and Hepatobiliary Task Force. For the past 30 years, Sarah has been a healthcare business professional and ambassador for patients and care teams around the world. Her passion for the promise of optimal healthcare for all stems from a loss of a family member early in her life, and more recently, the loss of her husband, Greg, in 2020 from liver cancer. She has served as a member for the Cancer University Board and is a patient advocate representative, a speaker for pharmaceutical companies, and a mentor for caregivers through various organizations, including Immerman's Angels, California Cancer Support Community, and Blue Fairy. She is a dedicated patient, family, and care team advocate that strives for advocating for a cure, the well-being of care teams and patients they serve, and keeping hope alive and celebrating joys in life every day, especially when looking out at the ocean. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us to talk to us about how to be an effective self-advocate.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Guy. And thank you, American Liver Foundation, for making it a priority to help us become better patient advocates and caregivers in the face of this insidious disease. I'm really excited about this conference. I wish this conference was available to me 4 years ago when I started my liver cancer journey with Greg. To the patients and caregivers out there, first off, I am sorry that you're going through this life trial. And I know that this is the last place that you want to be learning about liver cancer and learning about effective patient advocacy in the face of this disease. But the good news is you already are one. You've got the foundation, and I know this because you're here. You're investing the time as you recognize the importance of this. But what is not natural, you guys, I know, is navigating the healthcare system. It is daunting. We learned so much this morning from Lacey and Dr. Sheehan and the speakers that we had, Andrea Wilson. You guys did a phenomenal job at laying some basic foundation, and yesterday's speakers were great as well. I have to say that it's Saturday though. This is the last session. And so I thought I'd begin with a favorite movie scene of mine, because I think you guys can relate to this. The movie is called The Bear. It's about a grizzly bear trophy hunter. And after several weeks of tracking this 1,500-pound grizzly bear in the Canadian Rockies, this hunter finds himself at the edge of a cliff and his rifle is out of reach. He hears something behind him and he looks over his shoulder, and there is the bear. And there are two ways this can go. With a swipe of a paw, the bear can destroy him, or the bear can have mercy and retreat back into the woods. When Greg was diagnosed in November of 2016, and I was his caregiver and his partner in the fight, this is how we felt most days at the beginning of this journey, and perhaps how you feel today. In my early advocacy work, I was really curious and did some digging. I wanted to understand if there was any research that proved that patient advocacy and patient engagement made a difference. And I was really blown away at not only the volume of research, but the impact that this can have. Studies upon studies demonstrate that the more informed you are as a patient and caregiver, the more engaged you're going to be with taking charge of your health, of managing this disease, and it will result in better outcomes. Everything improves. Managing side effects, improving your diet, your quality of life, and ultimately helping you live longer. In fact, one study stated patient engagement and patient activation have been referred to as the blockbuster drug of the century. This works. New studies and treatment options for HCC are hitting the market at a rapid pace, as we learned yesterday. While this is promising and super exciting, it requires us as patients and caregivers to stay on top of this and navigate and understand the information in order to select the treatment that is right for you and manage the inevitable side effects. You know, our hepatologists and oncologists went to school for a decade to learn this stuff. And when we're given this diagnosis, we have to have a crash course in hepatology, in liver function, in liver cancer, as all of the decisions are on us. So today what I'd like to do is share some insights with you that worked for us. And by no means is this an end all. I'd just like to get you thinking about what might be right for you. And there are so many, but I've boiled them down to my top 5. The first insight is find the right doctor, find the right team of doctors. This is so important, you guys. Interview them. Do you connect with them? Do you guys relate to one another? Do they care about you? And what motivates them? How knowledgeable are they with the latest and greatest treatment options? How do they get informed about these new treatment options? How will they be not just for today, but throughout your journey? This rapport, it builds trust and it builds confidence, and you are far more likely to follow their lead and they yours. It's such a personal journey and relationship. This is your life. Secondly, and as important, interview their affiliated cancer center. We worked with some brilliant physicians here in the Bay Area. I mean, we've got so many here in our backyard. Early on in Greg's diagnosis, but it became really clear to us that those physicians did not have the support system for them in, education, scheduling. The nursing staff is so critical, cross-functional communication with the health system. They were not there to support these doctors. So we moved on. And thankfully for us, we found the best team for us and you, Dr. Guy, at Sutter CPMC San Francisco, and with Dr. Jeffrey Spencer at Sutter Health in San Jose, and Dr. Katie Kelly at UCSF. The best move that we made. We had the best team for us. Find out if that cancer center does research and participate in clinical trials. Some may, some may not. This enables you access to the latest and greatest options. Also important, a practical thing are where are those treatments conducted? Convenience and quality of life. I know you're striving for that, and you're more apt to be compliant with treatments if it's convenient for you. What patient and family support system do they have? And what is their after-hours support protocol? It seems like every scary episode that we went through was either on the weekend or in the middle of the night. So make sure you understand what those protocols are and if they'll be there for you 24/7. And lastly, as important here is ask other patients and caregivers about that cancer center. You want to understand the good, bad, and the ugly and learn from them. And finally, get second and third opinions. Don't be shy about asking your doctor team for other referrals. Ask who they would refer their loved ones to for a second opinion. This is going to bring you confidence and help you feel comfortable in the decisions that you make for your life. Insight 2 is you are the captain of the ship. Your doctor team is the crew. And once you've selected your doctor team, share what you need and want. Like any new relationship, you can't rely on them to know. So share. What are your priorities? Quality of life? Is it length? Is it a combination thereof? Let them know how much and what type of information you want them to share with you. Some folks I talk to just don't want to know prognosis and statistics speak. Some do. So make sure that you share with them how much and what type of information you want to know about and in what format. Tell them how you want them to interact with your caregiver, your family, and your loved ones. Lacey had some great points there that I couldn't agree more with. It was helpful for me to have my sister and her husband, our support system, with me on a couple of appointments that enabled them to ask questions that I wouldn't even think of. So make sure that you share how you want the doctor team to communicate with you and your support system. Be vocal. Report any and all side effects. And even if some symptoms may seem minor to you, report that. It may indicate something serious. You are not a bother. And if you appear to be one, then that's not the right physician team for you. Be persistent with what you need. Don't be shy, especially if you find yourself in the hospital. Keep a journal. Ask questions and record and document. Write your questions down of each doctor. I'd like to echo what Dr. Today said yesterday. Your mind is swirling and your retention is zilch. This is really normal. So ask questions of everyone. I kept 4 categories of records that was really helpful for me. The first category was that Q&A by provider. I leaned on these documents to remind me of common symptoms, side effects, and frankly, when I should freak out or not. And the second thing is diagnosis and diagnostics. Those radiology scans, the lab results, the opinions, I relied on these so heavily, and also to look at trends. The third category is on treatments, drugs and side effects, the pros and cons of each, and contingency plans. If this treatment stops working, what could be next, and what's next after that? And lastly is insurance. Know that there are many options for you if you can't afford treatment. Many drug companies offer assistance programs. All you have to do is ask, and your social worker can really help you with that. You're partners now with your doctor team. This is your life, and you are captain of the ship, not your doctors. They're the crew. So once you set your course with your doctor team, they're going to help you navigate the waters and achieve your goals. The third insight is communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate with all doctors and all medical centers. You know, there's a huge gap in communication between doctors and medical centers. It's a flaw in our healthcare system, not the doctor's fault. It's a flaw in the healthcare system. HCC is a disease within a disease, as we heard about yesterday. So it's really common to have multiple providers. You know, we had more than 5. We had our hepatologist and our oncologist. We had an endocrinologist, cardiologist, palliative care doctor, primary care. I used to joke with Greg, that's all that's missing is our veterinarian, and maybe we should invite him to the party. All these guys and gals, they're likely from different health systems, so there's no common electronic health record oftentimes, and it's difficult for them to connect. So you're going to have to fill that gap. And yes, sometimes physically take those scans from one center to the other, and share the lab results, have those with you at every doctor's appointment. That's really important, as is keeping your medication card updated and with you at all times. That goes for you patients and you caregivers and the entire family circle. Those medication cards need to be updated because it's really common, as you know, to have 12, 15 different drugs on board and the doses change. So they've become really essential when you're in front of another doctor or in an emergency situation. Fourth is assemble your support system. More than likely your family and your friends, I hope, have never gone through anything like this. It's an extraordinary journey. Find your tribe, reach out, they're out there. People that have gone through a similar journey. You'll find not only information, but hope, learning that folks get through this, and it'll fuel your confidence and it'll fuel your courage. If you don't have an advocate, find one to go with you on your doctor's appointments. This is important. The online support resources are amazing. They offer coaching, buddies, or mentors for each stage of your journey. You know, at the beginning of our journey, transplant was daunting, and we multi-listed 2 different medical centers for Greg, and the support I got from those buddies that have gone through transplant is one of the reasons why I'm an advocate today. And so that changes, though, after Greg was delisted from transplant. It was then all about the world of clinical trials. And so getting support for clinical trials is really, was really important in the next step of our journey, as was the treatment side effects and then emotional struggles. Patients and caregivers need different types of support, as you well know, and each person in your circle is going through this. Cancer is a family affair, and each will need support in different ways. So reach out. The support groups I used, and I've provided the American Liver Foundation with a list, include Inspire, Immerman's Angels, the Cancer Support Community, Blue Fairy, which is amazing because it's all about HCC, which is such a unique cancer. Now that the American Liver Foundation has a support group, I'm looking forward to becoming more involved with that. And locally here in Northern California, Cancer Care Point is a really neat program that offers counseling, support groups. It offers creative outlets, classes, massage, all types of programs, and it's all free. So look into those. And the fifth insight, the final insight, is hope is stronger than fear. Don't give up ever. Dr. Abu Alfa said it perfectly yesterday. Have faith. There are new treatments coming out for this all the time. There are new methods to handle side effects and improve your quality of life. Be kind to yourself. You're going to make mistakes. You learn from them and you move on. It's okay. If you're a caregiver, you take care of yourself first and foremost. I'm glad we really stressed that today. It's so important. This is going to enable you to be there for your loved one in the long haul. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You know, I love that airplane. I use the airplane analogy where they say, put your mask on first before treating your child. That's perfect for what we're going through. It makes a lot of sense. Be present for and celebrate today. Focus in on those wonderful moments, both big and small. And that's really true for anyone in life, right? Not just us affected by liver cancer, especially in the face of COVID. So I want to stress that. But back to the bear. After Greg was delisted for liver transplant, Greg and I became friends with the bear. And after, grim prognosis of months maybe to live, we had years together. And making friends with the bear enabled us to be present every day and celebrate life every day together, to do the things that we love to do and cross off those bucket list items. And when it was time for Greg to go, he made that decision. He knew it was his time, and it was okay because he was the captain of the ship and we had the best crew. So thank you, everybody. I believe we've got some time for questions after this. And I also understand that this might not be a comfortable forum to ask questions in. So I'm available. The American Liver Foundation knows how to reach me, and I'm cheering you on every step of the way. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Those were such inspiring words. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm sure we can connect with the audience with you through the American Liver Foundation. This will conclude our conference, and I'm going to give some closing remarks. Wow, what a wonderful 2 days of information, stories, inspiring and practical advice. I just wanted to say that wherever you are along your journey with liver cancer, whether it's newly diagnosed, in the middle of treatment, or if you're a survivor, we really hope that you've enjoyed this conference. Yesterday, we talked about just basic liver cancer 101. We went over an overview of liver cancer treatment. We showed you hopefully what your team should look like with the different types of providers, and how as providers we sort of approach this working together with the patients and their families. Today, we had great tips on how to navigate clinical trials. More about some really practical advice on developing an advance directive and estate planning, and then really helpful information on diet and exercise. The presentations by Lacey Fetting, our social worker, on resources for patients and caregivers that are available was really informative and practical. And Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your story and really good real life advice. Truly inspiring. It's been a great 2 days. Thank you for all of our presenters. and the organizing team. Thank you to Lindsay, Megan, and Ivory at the American Liver Foundation, really all the behind the scenes work to bring this conference to our audience is really appreciated. We could not do this without our sponsors, which are Merck, ESA, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Exelixis. So, and then, most importantly, of course, thank you to our audience for attending our first patient-centered liver cancer conference. For the audience, please join the American Liver Foundation support group on Facebook, and you'll be getting a liver cancer patient toolkit with a lot of the practical advice that was reviewed today and yesterday. And please know, for you as a patient with liver cancer, the American Liver Foundation, your family, your providers, your community, we're all your team, we're all here for you, and you are not alone. So thank you for your